The chandeliers in Madame Beatrice's Banana Island mansion sparkled like fallen stars. Everything about her home whispered old money and quiet power, from the imported Italian marble floors to the scent of oud drifting through the hallways. Beatrice sat at the head of her long glass dining table, dressed in champagne silk, her fingers adorned with gold rings passed down through generations. Across from her sat four of Lagos's most elite women, wives of senators, oil magnates, and shipping tycoons. They sipped hibiscus martinis, their nails manicured, their laughter light. But the mood shifted the moment Madame Beatrice cleared her throat. "I have a proposition," she said, her voice smooth as satin. "It concerns my son, Aiden." The women quieted. Everyone knew Aiden Khalifa. Brilliant, reserved, fiercely handsome, and terminally ill. Leukemia had stolen his spark and shadowed his once vibrant life. He was 30, unmarried, and slowly wasting away in a wing of this very mansion. Beatrice continued, "I want one of your daughters to marry him. It will be a private union. No stress, no public obligations. Just companionship for his final months. And, ideally, a child to carry on the Khalifa name." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then laughter. "You want my Adana to marry a dying man?" scoffed Mrs. Osaimi, swirling her drink. Mrs. Daramola leaned forward. "Beatrice, we sympathize, but our girls are not caregivers. They're preparing for MBAs in Paris and weddings in Santorini." The third woman, younger and snobbier, gave a mock gasp. "Do you expect them to change diapers? Push for drips?" Even the kindest of them, Mrs. Okoro, shifted uncomfortably. "You know I adore Aiden. But my daughter, she's barely 22. She's not built for grief." Beatrice clenched her jaw but kept her expression composed. "There will be a generous compensation. Land, shares in Khalifa Holdings, a secure future." The room fell into silence again. But still, one by one, they declined. Their daughters, they said, wanted love, glamour, health, not grief. By the end of the luncheon, Beatrice stood alone in the echo of their rejection. That night, she stared at the closed door of Aiden's suite. She could hear his cough through the thick mahogany. He didn't know she'd gone shopping for a wife. He'd probably be furious if he did. But she wasn't ready to bury her only child without an heir. She'd do anything, cross any line, to make sure his name lived on. The next morning, she went someplace she hadn't been in years. The public hospital on the mainland. She had heard whispers about a girl there. Kind one, soft-spoken, always volunteering extra shifts. No family name, no pedigree, no ambition beyond survival. Perfect. That was where she first saw her, Andrea. Andrea wore a plain white uniform and carried a tray of meals down a long corridor. Her skin glowed with the simplicity of someone untouched by luxury, yet she had a quiet beauty, one that didn't beg for attention but earned it. She bent to help an old patient adjust his pillow, smiled when he sneezed on her sleeve, and moved on without complaint. Beatrice approached with the grace of royalty. "You're Andrea, yes?" Andrea turned, surprised. "Yes, Ma. How may I help you?" "I'd like to speak with you privately." Andrea followed her into a corner office, nervously wiping her hands on her uniform. The woman before her looked like wealth personified. Pearls, heels, presents. Beatrice didn't waste time. "My name is Madame Beatrice Khalifa. My son has leukemia. He's dying. I need a kind woman to marry him and care for him in his final months. In exchange, you will receive financial security, education funds, a home, anything you need." Andrea's heart thudded. "You want me to marry your son? You're not a society girl. You don't need to pretend. I read your file. You're bright. You want to return to school. You have no family, but you have compassion." She paused. "I've tried the rich. None of them wanted him. But you might be his piece." Andrea stood still for a long time. Her mind raced. She had no dreams of diamonds or designer gowns. All she ever wanted was to finish school, get a degree in public health, and open a small clinic in Ajagunal one day. But life had dealt her poverty, loss, and sacrifice. Still, something about the proposition didn't disgust her. It was odd, but it also felt like something she was meant for. "I don't want your money," Andrea finally said, "but I will accept the offer, because I know what it's like to feel forgotten. And if I can bring someone comfort, even just once, I will." Madame Beatrice blinked, caught off guard by the girl's calm strength. Andrea continued, "I'll marry him, I'll take care of him, but I'll do it with dignity. No secrets, no pretending." Beatrice smiled, hiding her deeper satisfaction. "Of course, dear." She didn't mention that Aiden didn't know this was coming. The wedding was silent. No guests, no flowers, no music. Just the whisper of a priest's voice echoing through the private chapel in Madame Beatrice's mansion. Andrea stood still, her palms moist inside delicate lace gloves. The gown was simple, off-white silk with no fuss, no embellishments. It was borrowed, likely owned by Beatrice herself decades ago. Still, Andrea looked like grace carved from quiet resilience. Aiden, seated in a wheelchair, didn't lift his gaze once. His sharp features were paler than they should have been. Dark circles settled under his eyes like permanent bruises. He wore a black suit that hung too loose on his frame and a bitter scowl like a shield. "Do you take Andrea Okanwa?" the priest began. Aiden's jaw flexed. "I do," he said dryly. Andrea's voice was clearer, softer. "I do." When the priest declared them husband and wife, no one clapped. Madame Beatrice stood to the side, arms crossed, watching like a commander finishing a negotiation, not a mother witnessing her son's marriage. Afterward, in the master bedroom that now belonged to both of them, Andrea placed her wedding ring on the nightstand and quietly began to unpack. Aiden sat on the edge of the bed, arms crossed. "Let's make one thing clear," he said. She paused, folding a shirt. "Yes, I know you didn't marry me out of love, so let's not pretend. You'll have your money, you'll care for me, that's it. No romantic illusions." Andrea turned to face him. "I'm not pretending, Aiden. I know what this is. But I don't need to be in love with you to be kind to you." He blinked at her. "I didn't marry you for money," she added. "I married you because I believe everyone deserves dignity, even while dying." Silence. Aiden looked away, jaw tightening again. Andrea gave him space. She didn't press. Instead, she unpacked the rest of her modest belongings, neatly arranging her 3 books, a hairbrush, and her favorite scarf on a small shelf in the corner. That night, she slept on the couch. He didn't ask her to. She just did. Over the next few weeks, Andrea moved through the Khalifa mansion with the efficiency of a nurse and the gentleness of a friend. She never overstepped. She didn't pry, but she was there. When Aiden woke up breathless from a panic attack at 2 a.m., she was there. When his nose bled uncontrollably one afternoon, she held the compress and stroked his back until the trembling stopped. When he struggled to walk to the garden because the sunlight hurt his head, she shaded him with an umbrella and read aloud softly from a novel. Aiden tried to resist. He tried to keep his words sharp, his gaze cold. But Andrea's presence felt like aloe to a deep, hidden burn. Once, she came into the room holding a tray. "You didn't have to bring me breakfast," he said, his tone biting. "I didn't," she replied, setting it down. "I brought myself breakfast, but I made extra eggs. I hate wasting food." He smirked. "Just a little. Smart girl." She smiled. "And you're a grumpy one." That was the beginning of the thaw. One Thursday afternoon, Andrea accompanied him to his hospital appointment. She insisted on coming, said she'd taken the day off from the foundation Madame Beatrice set up in her name. Beatrice wasn't thrilled, but Aiden hadn't objected. In the waiting room, Andrea sat beside him, holding his hand, not out of obligation, but because it felt natural now. "How long have you been sick?" she asked gently. "About a year now," he replied. "Before that, I worked, I traveled, I started my own creative firm. I was doing well until all of this." She nodded. "Do you ever get scared?" He hesitated. Then softly, "All the time. I'm here," she whispered. "Even if you push me away sometimes." Aiden looked at her then, really looked. She wore a yellow blouse, simple and bright. Her eyes were soft, like the morning sun. And for the first time, he realized she wasn't just someone who pitied him. She was someone who saw him. The nights grew easier. They shared late-night tea, played card games on quiet evenings. She told him about her dreams of going back to school. He confessed that he once wanted to be a painter. Once, he had a mild seizure, and when he opened his eyes, Andrea was there. Her face pale with fear but her hands steady. "Don't leave me," he croaked. "I won't," she whispered, tears brimming. And she didn't. Weeks turned into 2 months. Andrea moved back into the bed. He didn't ask, and she didn't explain. One night, after she returned from the kitchen with warm cocoa, he reached for her hand without looking. She let him. Their fingers intertwined easily, like it had always been that way. Aiden lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. He didn't feel like he was dying anymore. In fact, he hadn't felt weak in weeks. His new doctor had confirmed it weeks ago during a second review. It was never leukemia, just a rare blood disorder, treatable, non-fatal, and now managed. He should have told her. He should have said something the moment he found out. But every time he tried, the fear came. Would she leave if she knew? Would she stop caring for him? Would her tenderness dissolve the moment he became just another man? So he kept quiet, and let her love him in his sickness. Even though he was no longer sick. The Khalifa mansion had always been an echo chamber of wealth. Rooms filled with silence instead of laughter, chandeliers instead of warmth. But since Andrea's arrival, something had changed. The staff noticed it first. The cook, Mama EKA, found herself making lighter dishes because Andrea insisted Aiden needed food he could actually enjoy. The housekeeper began dusting the library more frequently, because Andrea had turned it into Aiden's reading haven. And the gardener now trimmed the roses with extra care, because she took Aiden there every morning to feel the sun on his face. Andrea never demanded respect from the staff. She simply earned it. But to Madame Beatrice, she was still the girl. Andrea didn't press. She wasn't there to win over the matriarch. She had promised herself one thing. She would be kind to Aiden until the very end, no matter what the others thought. Each morning started with tea on the garden bench. Andrea would sit beside Aiden, who wore sunglasses to shield his eyes from the harsh light. She'd read to him, sometimes poetry, sometimes the news, sometimes silly riddles she found online. One morning, he turned to her and asked, "Why do you do all this?" "All what?" "This," he gestured around. "You don't have to sit with me. You don't have to read to me. You've already fulfilled the contract." Andrea set the book down. "I know, but I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing it because I want to." He looked at her like he couldn't quite believe her. "And," she added, "you're not as terrible as you try to be." Aiden chuckled, the sound low and rare. "You think I'm pretending to be terrible? I know you are." Her eyes sparkled with quiet mischief. For a moment, Aiden forgot the weight of illness, the betrayal of misdiagnosis, and even the shame of hiding it from her. He simply existed, in the presence of a woman who saw through all his defenses. That evening, she brought in a canvas and a small set of paints. "What's this?" Aiden asked from the bed. "You told me you used to want to paint. So paint." He hesitated. "That was before. Before doesn't matter. Now does." Aiden stared at her for a long time. Then, silently, he pulled the canvas toward him. Andrea left the room quietly and returned an hour later to find soft blue strokes across the page. They weren't perfect, but they were alive. He never said thank you. He didn't have to. Days passed. The house felt less like a tomb and more like a home. Andrea didn't pry into Aiden's illness. She never asked about death or how much time he had left. She just made each day feel like it was enough. But Aiden carried the weight of his secret like a stone on his chest. He wasn't dying. He hadn't been for nearly a month now. He had sat through the doctor's words in stunned silence. "No leukemia. You were misdiagnosed. What you have is manageable. You'll live." It should have been a relief, but instead it terrified him. He'd fallen in love with a woman who married him to help him die, not to build a life. Would she still want him now? Would her eyes still soften when she looked at him? So he told no one, not even her. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled above Banana Island, Andrea entered his room with a tray of yam porridge and ginger tea. She paused when she saw him sketching. The painting had grown. Now there were 3 people, 2 adults and a child, on a bench beneath a tree. "Is that us?" she asked softly. Aiden didn't look up. "Could be." She walked over and studied the small girl in the painting. "Who's she?" "I don't know," he murmured. "Maybe someone we haven't met yet." Andrea smiled, but something inside her ached. It had become harder to imagine this man dying. He seemed stronger. His color had returned. His laughter came easier. She never asked questions, but late at night she began to wonder. What if they'd gotten it wrong? What if he might actually live? And if he did, where did that leave her? Madame Beatrice wasn't blind. She watched from afar. She saw the shift in her son. His skin glowed. His spirit returned. But more alarmingly, he looked at Andrea with love. That was not the plan. Andrea had been a placeholder, a vessel, a soft shoulder for a man she thought wouldn't survive the year. Beatrice had never intended for her to stay once Aiden recovered. She confronted her son one evening after Andrea had gone to the library. "She's getting too comfortable," Beatrice said, standing at the doorway. Aiden didn't turn. "She lives here. She's my wife. Only because she agreed to marry a dying man. You're not dying anymore." He turned sharply. "Don't say that like it's an insult. It's a fact," Beatrice snapped. "You're healthy now, and you have responsibilities. Our name, our legacy. You can't build it with someone like her." Aiden's jaw clenched. "You didn't care about that when you begged someone to marry me. That was different." "No," he said coldly. "You thought I was going to die, so you found someone willing to sit beside a corpse. And now that I'm not dying, you want to erase the only person who stood by me when I was." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "Don't let pity cloud your judgment." Aiden's voice was quiet but firm. "It's not pity. It's love." Beatrice left the room in silence. That night, Andrea curled beside him in bed. He watched her sleep, her fingers loosely resting over his. She didn't know what wars were being fought over her place in his life. She didn't know about the misdiagnosis, about the confrontation. She just existed beside him, honest, good, undeserving of the lie he was living. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'll fix this," he whispered. "I'll protect you, even if it meant losing everything else." It was a warm Saturday morning, and Banana Island shimmered with the lazy glow of wealth. Outside the Khalifa estate, the gates stood tall, guards at attention. But inside, the grand mansion felt like a world far removed from riches and reputation, at least inside Aiden's room. Andrea was watering a small pot of sunflowers on the windowsill. She'd insisted on growing something alive, something cheerful, even in a house that had once prepared itself for death. Aiden watched her from the bed, his sketchbook in hand. The sun cast golden ribbons across her skin, and for a moment, she looked like something out of a dream. He'd spent the past few days sketching her more than anything else. Her hair, her hands, the gentle curve of her smile. He didn't know how much longer he could keep lying. But he also didn't know how to stop. Aiden wasn't dying anymore. In fact, he hadn't had a single episode in nearly a month. His blood work remained steady. His energy had returned. His appetite was back. He was, by all accounts, living. Yet each time Andrea brought him tea, each time she placed her hand on his chest during a coughing fit, whether real or exaggerated, his heart fractured a little more. She loved him. He could feel it in her care, in her laughter, in the way she curled up beside him at night like he was her safe place. But was it the love of a nurse for her patient? A friend for the man she believed was dying? Would that love survive the truth? That afternoon, Andrea placed a folded letter on his nightstand. He glanced at it. "What's this?" She smiled softly. "My admission offer. University of Ibadan. They accepted me for their part-time public health program." Aiden sat up. "You're going back to school?" "I want to," she said. "Not just for me, but for every girl who thought dreams were too expensive. I'll be attending part-time while still staying here to care for you. His chest tightened. She was still planning her life around a lie. He cleared his throat. That's incredible. You deserve it. Her eyes sparkled. You helped make it possible, Aiden. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you for this life. He looked down at his lap, the guilt crawling up his spine. There's something I need to. A knock interrupted him. It was Madame Beatrice. She entered like she owned the oxygen in the room. Her perfume sharp and expensive, her expression unreadable. May I speak to my son? She asked Andrea, with a tone that barely masked condescension. Andrea hesitated, but then nodded. Of course, I'll be in the garden. Once she left, the atmosphere shifted. Beatrice didn't sit. She stood near the bed like a judge behind her bench. I saw the letter. Aiden looked at her warily. What letter? The university admission. She's making herself at home, building a future with you. That wasn't our arrangement. He closed the sketchbook. There's no arrangement anymore. Things changed. I never approved of her long-term presence, Aiden. I brought her in because no one else would take the role. But you're better now. Healthy. Free. You can have a real life. Don't waste it on her. He snapped. She's the reason I wanted to get better in the first place. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Then maybe it's time she knows the truth. Aiden stood slowly. You wouldn't. You think she'll stay once she finds out you've been pretending to be sick just to keep her? Beatrice's tone was cold and final. Tell her the truth, or I will. That night, Aiden couldn't sleep. Andrea rested beside him, her hand on his chest, steady and warm. She mumbled something in her sleep, his name. A soft smile spread across her lips. He sat up, breathing hard. The weight of his lie had become unbearable. He got out of bed and walked to the balcony, letting the wind slap his face. This woman had washed his clothes, cooked for him, held him during panic attacks, given him dignity, hope, light, and he'd lied to her every single day. It wasn't fair. Not to her. Not anymore. The next morning, Andrea found Aiden pacing in the living room. He looked torn, as if he hadn't slept. What's wrong? She asked gently. There's something I need to tell you, he began. But before he could speak, Madame Beatrice walked in, again, uninvited. This time she carried a small file. She tossed it onto the coffee table between them. Andrea blinked. What's this? Beatrice didn't wait for permission. Your husband has been healthy for over a month. He doesn't have leukemia. Never did. It was a misdiagnosis. He's been pretending for you. Andrea turned slowly toward Aiden. Her face didn't twist in anger. It crumbled in disbelief. Aiden, is that true? Aiden's lips parted, but the words stuck in his throat. I wanted to tell you, but you didn't, Andrea whispered. You let me stay. Let me nurse you. Let me build a life around a lie. Tears welled in her eyes. Why? Because I didn't want to lose you, he said, voice breaking. I was afraid if you knew I wasn't dying, you'd leave. She stepped back, shaking her head. I never stayed because you were sick. I stayed because you were kind, gentle, real. You let me in when no one else did. Her voice broke. But now I don't know who I married. Andrea walked out of the room, and for the first time since the wedding, Aiden didn't follow. Because this time she wasn't just walking into the garden. She was walking away from him. Aiden had always imagined heartbreak would come like thunder. Loud, fast, unstoppable. But as he sat alone on the edge of his bed, staring at the empty space where Andrea's pillow used to lie, he realized it was quieter than that, more suffocating, like the air itself was grieving with him. She hadn't returned to their bedroom the night before. She hadn't answered his texts. She hadn't touched her breakfast tray. And worst of all, she hadn't cried in front of him. That meant she'd already started detaching. Quiet exits hurt the most. Downstairs, Madame Beatrice was sipping orange tea on the veranda, watching the morning unfold like it belonged to her. Aiden descended the stairs, his footsteps firm. "We need to talk," he said coldly. Beatrice didn't look up. She took her things. "I assume that's what you wanted." "No," he snapped. "That's what you wanted." She gave him a glance. "You lied to her. You should be thanking me for speeding up the inevitable." Aiden leaned in. "You keep forgetting one thing, Mum. I'm not dying anymore. You can't control me with guilt. And you can't control my life." Beatrice's jaw tightened. "You're my son. And Andrea is my choice," he said, voice shaking with anger. "Whether sick or healthy, rich or broke, she's the only person who's ever seen me. Not just the name, the money, or the illness. Me." Beatrice stood. "You're making a mistake." "Then I'll live with it," Aiden said. "Because the only real mistake was pretending that love needed your permission." Andrea had taken refuge at a quiet hostel near the university campus. She needed space. Not just from Aiden, but from the whirlwind of wealth, secrets, and manipulation that had drowned her. She sat cross-legged on the bed, holding the file Beatrice had thrown at her. Inside were lab reports, doctor's notes, confirmation letters, all dated weeks back. Evidence that Aiden had known he was fine, and said nothing. A part of her still loved him, desperately, but another part of her felt used. Like she had been a project, a phase, a good deed gone wrong. A knock came at the door. She didn't move. Another knock. "Andrea." Aiden's voice broke through. Her heart jumped. She opened the door slowly. He stood there holding a single sunflower, her favorite. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "I know. I should have told you the moment I found out. I was scared, not of losing your help, but of losing you." She let him in silently. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed, looking nothing like the wealthy Banana Island heir and everything like a man who had fallen from grace. "I was never trying to deceive you out of malice," he continued. "You came into my life like air into a sealed room. You gave me hope, not pity, not duty, just presence." Andrea's eyes filled. "You made me feel special, Aiden, and I still don't know if that was real or just part of the illusion you built." He shook his head, voice cracking. "It was real. It is real. Every word, every laugh, every kiss. But I know I don't deserve to say that." She looked down, wiping her face. "I didn't marry you to get rich," she whispered. "I married you because I wanted to bring light to someone's life. And for a while, I thought that person had brought light into mine too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. It was her scholarship confirmation, freshly approved. "I sent it in on your behalf," he said. "Full funding, textbooks, even housing. It's not a bribe. It's a thank you for every night you stayed, every meal you made, every part of me you healed." Andrea stared at the paper. "Why?" "Because you made me believe I deserved more than death." Later that day, Andrea returned to the mansion, but not as a wife coming home. She arrived with her things to pack. Beatrice was waiting in the foyer. "You're leaving," she said, sounding triumphant. Andrea met her gaze calmly. "Yes, but not because of you." Beatrice narrowed her eyes. Andrea continued, "I'm leaving to breathe, to finish school, to build my own name. But don't get comfortable because I'll be back. Not as your employee, not even as your daughter-in-law, but as the woman he chose." She walked past her with quiet grace, her heels clicking against the marble, head high. Aiden didn't try to stop her that day. He knew what she needed: time, space, healing. But he made her a promise as she stepped into the car. "I'll wait for you," he said. "And when you're ready, I'll be here. Not because I'm sick, not because I need help, but because I love you." Andrea's eyes softened. "I'll come back when I believe that again." In the weeks that followed, the mansion grew quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. This time it felt like waiting. Aiden went back to painting. He launched a foundation for misdiagnosed patients. He traveled. He spoke at medical conferences. He did the things Andrea once encouraged him to do. And every Sunday, a bouquet of sunflowers was delivered to her school mailbox. No notes, just a name: Aiden. Andrea sat beneath a jacaranda tree on the University of Abadan campus, flipping through a dense textbook on maternal health. Her classes were going well. She had passed her first set of assessments with high scores, and the lecturers already knew her by name. But in the quiet moments, between lectures and lab work, her mind wandered to Aiden. He had kept his promise. Every week, without fail, a bouquet of fresh sunflowers arrived at her hostel, bright, bold, impossible to ignore. No letter, no message, just Aiden's name, signed in delicate script. She tried not to read too much into it, but her heart, foolish as ever, still skipped every time she saw them. One Friday evening, as she walked out of her last class, she found a surprise waiting. Not a bouquet, but a person, Aiden. He leaned against a black SUV, dressed casually in a navy shirt and jeans. No security, no chauffeur, no pretenses. She froze mid-step. He smiled faintly. "Before you panic, I'm not here to disrupt your peace." Andrea approached slowly. "What are you doing here?" "Giving you something I should have given you months ago," he said. "The truth. All of it." She said nothing, so he continued. "My mother didn't just come up with the plan to pay someone to marry me overnight. She spent weeks trying to bribe the daughters of her wealthy friends, girls from powerful families, but none of them wanted to be tied to a dying man." Andrea blinked. "I didn't know that." He nodded. "They rejected her one by one, until someone mentioned a girl who worked at the hospital. Sweet, smart, compassionate, desperate." Andrea flinched slightly at the last word. "I'm not saying it to insult you," Aiden added quickly. "I'm saying it because it's the truth. You were desperate for school fees, and you had a dying man's mother standing in front of you, offering you freedom." Andrea folded her arms. "And you were okay with her choosing someone like me? A stranger?" "I didn't know," he admitted. "She didn't tell me until after we were married. I thought it was all arranged because I was dying." She stared at him, expression unreadable. "And when I found out I wasn't dying," he said quietly, "I should have told you right away, but by then, I was already in love with you, and I didn't know if that love was mine alone." Andrea's throat tightened. "You thought I'd leave." He nodded. "But I underestimated you." A beat passed. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above them. "Why now?" she asked. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you deserve to choose," he said. "You deserve to know everything. Where this started, how it changed, and why it's still real." Andrea looked away. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "I know," Aiden replied. "And I'm not asking for anything. Not today. I just needed to finally stop hiding." He held out a small envelope. "This is the deed to the clinic. In Adjugunal. It's yours now. Signed, funded, registered. I did it in your name." Andrea stared at him, stunned. "Why would you?" "Because you told me once that all you wanted was to open a place for people like your mother. People who fall through the cracks. And because no matter what happens between us, I want your dream to live." Tears pricked her eyes. He stepped back. "I won't come again unless you ask me to, but I'll wait, for as long as it takes." With that, he turned and left, disappearing into the Lagos evening. Andrea clutched the envelope to her chest and cried beneath the jacaranda tree. Not because he'd lied, not because he'd walked away, but because he had finally done something she didn't expect. He chose her freedom over his desire. Back at Banana Island, Madame Beatrice paced the length of her study. She'd heard from a driver that Aiden had gone to Abadan. She hadn't asked questions, but she'd seen the hope in his eyes when he returned. It irritated her. She had done everything for her son, fought his illness, built an empire, sought a woman to comfort him in death. But she had never prepared herself for the day he would choose someone outside their world in life. Andrea was good, yes, but she was lowborn, from a place where people sold sachet water and fried akara on street corners. She wasn't what Beatrice had envisioned for the Khalifa legacy. Still, Aiden had changed since Andrea came. He was bolder, kinder, more alive. Beatrice hated that she owed the girl for that. 1 week later, Andrea stood at the entrance of the new clinic. It was small but perfect, freshly painted, well-equipped, and located on a busy corner in Ajagunal. Children ran past with their school bags. An old man waved from a shop next door. Inside, a gold plaque read, Andrea Wellness Center, where kindness lives. Her knees nearly gave out. She sank onto the nearest bench, overwhelmed. She thought of Aiden's face, his trembling voice, his sunflower promises. He had lied, but he had also healed. And maybe, just maybe, that mattered more now. The clinic buzzed with life by its second week. Andrea wore her white coat with quiet pride, moving from patient to patient with calm efficiency. Mothers brought in sick babies. Old men came for blood pressure checks. A tired young girl came asking if she could volunteer to clean just so she could watch how Andrea worked. Word had spread. A small clinic with a big heart, people said. But despite the joy that bloomed around her, Andrea's heart was still bruised. At night, she sat by the window of her flat above the clinic, sunflowers in a vase by her side, wondering if healing others could ever truly heal her. And then one evening, everything changed. She was closing the reception desk for the night when she heard the door chime behind her. She turned and froze. Madame Beatrice stood there, dressed immaculately in an ivory caftan and gold heels, like she had just stepped off a Banana Island billboard. Andrea's chest tightened. "Good evening," Andrea said cautiously. "How can I help you?" Beatrice looked around the clinic with mild disdain before settling her gaze on Andrea. "You've done well for yourself," she said. "Very humble." Andrea forced a polite smile. "I'm proud of it." Beatrice's voice dropped. "You think building a small clinic makes you fit to be part of our family?" Andrea's smile faded. "I never asked to be part of your family, Ma. I was simply part of his life." Beatrice stepped forward. "You think this makes you a wife? A few months of playing nurse? A marriage bought with pity?" Andrea's hands curled into fists. "I never took money from you, Madame Beatrice. I married your son because he needed someone. I stayed because I saw the man underneath the illness. And I walked away because I believed in truth." Beatrice's eyes gleamed. "Then why hasn't he moved on? Why does he still send those ridiculous flowers every week?" Andrea swallowed. "Maybe because we both know it was real." Silence stretched between them. Beatrice stepped back, fixing her bag on her shoulder. "End it. For good," she said coldly. "Don't mistake kindness for acceptance. You'll never be welcome in our circle. Don't ruin what little dignity you've built by clinging to something that was never meant to last." And with that, she turned and walked out. Andrea locked the door and leaned against it, trembling. For a moment, all the doubt she had buried returned, sharp and cruel. Maybe she didn't belong. Maybe she'd only been a substitute until Aiden got well enough to choose someone proper. But then she looked at the wall across the room, the gold plaque with her name on it. "Where kindness lives." She had built something real, something that wasn't bought. And no amount of Beatrice's venom could take that away. The next morning, Aiden appeared at the clinic, unannounced. Andrea was in the middle of organizing new medical supplies when he stepped inside, holding a breakfast bag and a nervous smile. She blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I figured you hadn't eaten. You never eat when you're angry." She arched a brow. "You're assuming I'm still angry? You haven't responded to my last 3 messages, so?" Andrea crossed her arms. "Your mother came here last night." The smile faded from his face instantly. "What did she say?" "She told me to leave you. Again. Permanently this time." Aiden looked away, jaw clenching. "She said I don't belong in your world. That I was just a project." "And you believed her?" he asked softly. "No," Andrea said firmly. "But I needed to hear what you believe." He looked up at her then, eyes steady. "I believe you're the only real thing I've ever had." Andrea didn't move. "I believe that what we have, is bigger than this clinic or Banana Island or anything my mother built with her gold-plated pride." She didn't respond. He stepped closer. "I let fear make decisions for me once, Andrea. I won't do it again. So if you're still afraid, I'll wait." But if there's even a piece of your heart that still belongs to me, tell me now. Because I'm standing here ready to fight for you." Tears slipped down her cheek before she could stop them. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Tired of fighting to be enough." "You don't have to fight anymore," he said gently. "You are enough. You always were." Andrea stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He held her tightly, burying his face in her neck. For the first time in weeks, her heart beat in rhythm again. That evening, Andrea made a call. It was short, calm, and final. "Madame Beatrice," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not here to take your son away. I'm here because he chose me, and I chose him back. Whether or not that fits into your vision of legacy is no longer my concern." She ended the call before Beatrice could respond. She had spent enough of her life begging for space in rooms where she didn't belong. Now she was building her own. That weekend, Aiden moved into the flat above the clinic. They didn't rush. They didn't talk about the mansion. They just lived. They cooked together, laughed over burnt pancakes, fell asleep with medical books between them. They walked hand in hand through Ajagunal streets like they had nothing to prove and nowhere else they'd rather be. And when the next sunflower bouquet arrived, Andrea placed it in the clinic waiting room, not as a memory of a broken man, but as a symbol of love rebuilt on truth. It was the eve of Andrea's graduation ceremony. The university had announced her as one of the top graduates in the public health program, and the local papers had picked up her story. From maid to medicine, the woman who turned pain into purpose. Aiden read the headline from the couch in their flat above the clinic, smiling with pride. Andrea had just stepped out of the shower, towel wrapped around her, humming as she dried her hair. There was light in her again, a confidence that reminded him daily of how strong she'd always been, even when she didn't know it. But the peace wouldn't last long. Back at Banana Island, Madame Beatrice stood in her study, flipping through the same newspaper with rage boiling beneath her designer scarf. "Graduating with distinction," she scoffed. "Now they're calling her a role model?" She dropped the paper on her desk and picked up her phone. "Get me a Danma," she said into the receiver. "It's time we reminded my son what a real wife looks like." Adama Chikwudi, the daughter of a federal minister, was everything Beatrice dreamed of for her son. Elegant, educated, and elite. The two mothers had discussed marriage years ago, but Aiden's illness had stalled all talk of proposals. Now that he was healthy, Beatrice saw her opportunity to erase the Andrea mistake once and for all. She invited Adama to dinner, made sure the media was tipped off, and planted just enough bait for the blogs to catch wind. Heir to Khalifa Holdings reconnects with minister's daughter. The plan was simple: humiliate Andrea publicly and push Aiden back into the fold. Aiden found out 2 hours after the story broke online. He and Andrea were at a cafe in Yaba, celebrating her acceptance into a postgraduate research program. Her eyes sparkled as she talked about starting a community health outreach in rural Lagos. Then his phone buzzed. He went pale. "What is it?" Andrea asked mid-sentence. He hesitated before turning the phone toward her. She read the headline slowly. "Billionaire Aiden Khalifa caught on private dinner with political heiress? Is Andrea out of the picture?" Andrea's smile vanished. She stood up quietly. "So that's what this is now?" "It's not true," Aiden said quickly. "I didn't even know." "It doesn't matter," she cut in, her voice low and hurt. "Your mother is still trying to erase me, and you still haven't made a public stand. That's not fair." "No," Andrea's eyes burned. "When I was poor, you hid me. When you were sick, I was your shadow. But now that you're well and I'm rising, I'm suddenly disposable again." Aiden stood too. "You are not disposable. I will fix this." "I don't want another promise," she said, turning away. "I want action." That night, Andrea didn't return to the flat. Aiden stayed up late drafting a press release. But words on paper didn't feel like enough. The next morning, dressed in a crisp navy suit, he stepped onto the stage at Andrea's graduation ceremony. The auditorium was packed, the moment designed for her. But as she walked across the stage to receive her certificate, a cheer broke out. Not from the crowd, but from Aiden, clapping loudly, proudly. Andrea paused mid-step. All eyes turned to him. He walked up to the microphone, his voice steady but emotional. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption, but I need to say something very personal and very overdue. Andrea froze. This woman, he said, pointing to her, is not just graduating with distinction. She is the reason I am alive today. The reason I learned to live beyond sickness, beyond wealth, beyond my name. The room went still. She married me when everyone else turned away, loved me when I was at my lowest, and helped me become a man again. Andrea's hands trembled. I have let my fear, my pride, and my family come between us too many times. But not anymore. He stepped off the stage, walked to her, and knelt before her in front of the entire crowd. Gasps erupted across the hall. From his pocket he pulled out a small velvet box. The ring was elegant, delicate gold with a sunflower carved into its curve. Not for a deal, he said. Not for a name, but for love. Andrea Okonwa? Will you marry me again? Andrea blinked, overwhelmed. Then slowly she nodded. Yes, she whispered. The hall exploded in applause. Tears ran freely down both their cheeks. This time there were no lies, no secrets, only love. The next morning, headlines shifted. Khalifa Heir proposes publicly to community health champion, Andrea, the girl who chose kindness and got chosen back. And for once, Madame Beatrice couldn't spin the narrative, because love had spoken too loudly to be ignored. The applause from the graduation ceremony hadn't even faded before the storm reached Banana Island. Madame Beatrice stood in front of the television in her lavish sitting room, arms folded tightly, watching the replay of Aiden's public proposal. The presenter's voice echoed, a heartfelt moment as billionaire Aiden Khalifa defied family tradition to propose to community health advocate Andrea Okonwa. Once considered a nobody, now the woman who won Nigeria's most eligible bachelor's heart. Beatrice's face twisted. She turned off the TV and hurled the remote across the room. Andrea, again. This time publicly and triumphantly. This time, in a way even Beatrice couldn't erase. At Andrea's flat, sunlight poured in through the balcony windows. She sat cross-legged on the couch, the proposal ring gleaming softly on her finger. Aiden was in the kitchenette, humming as he made jollof rice. Burning the bottom again, no doubt. Andrea's phone buzzed. The screen lit up. Mum Beatrice. She stared at it. Aiden noticed the shift in her expression. She's calling? Andrea nodded but didn't answer. Instead, she let it ring out. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Aiden went to open it, and there she was, Madame Beatrice dressed like war. Not a hair out of place. Not a smile in sight. We need to talk, she said to Andrea, stepping inside uninvited. Aiden moved to stop her, but Andrea gently touched his arm. Let me. He gave her space but stayed close enough to catch her if needed. Beatrice stood tall in the center of the living room, taking in the modest furniture, the books on the shelf, the painting Aiden had hung of Andrea standing in the clinic doorway. How quickly you've turned this place into a shrine, she said. Andrea didn't flinch. What do you want, Madame Beatrice? Beatrice's gaze sharpened. To ask you one last time to walk away. Aiden stepped forward. Mom. No, Aiden, Andrea said, her voice calm but steady. Let her speak. Beatrice's nostrils flared. You don't belong in our family. You never have. I let you in when I thought my son was dying. I tolerated your presence because I believed you'd fade quietly when the time came. But now you're building a legacy on his name, parading your struggle like it makes you worthy. Andrea's voice stayed even. I didn't parade anything. I built something with or without him. You just never imagined someone like me could rise. You're using him, Beatrice snapped. Your clinic, your career, your attention. It all came after he got involved with you. And yet, Andrea said, stepping closer, I turned down every offer to leave. I walked away when he lied. I didn't chase the name. I chased peace. Beatrice glared at her, then turned to Aiden. And you? You're really throwing away everything I built. For this. Aiden's voice was quiet, but powerful. Mom, what you built gave us money. Andrea gave me life. The silence in the room was deafening. Beatrice stepped back, swallowing her rage. I'll never accept her, she said flatly. Andrea stepped forward. You don't have to accept me, but you'll have to live with the fact that he chose me, and I chose him back. Aiden reached for Andrea's hand. Together they stood unshaken. Beatrice's eyes burned, but she said nothing else. She turned and walked out. The next day, Aiden received an official notice from the Khalifa Holdings Board. His seat as director was being reviewed. Beatrice had called an emergency vote, citing conflicts of interest and personal distractions damaging the family name. It was war, but Aiden didn't blink. He walked into the boardroom 3 days later, Andrea by his side. Not as a silent wife, but as a registered partner in the new healthcare foundation they were launching together. He stood tall, laid out his proposal for expanding Khalifa's investments into low-cost clinics across Nigeria, and challenged every board member to think beyond just luxury properties and oil. When one of the older men scoffed, "You'd risk our name on some charity project?" Andrea leaned in and replied, "You should be asking why our name isn't already on one." By the end of the meeting, the board postponed the vote. And for the first time, Beatrice realized her grip on the empire was slipping. But the real victory came weeks later, quiet, unexpected. Andrea found herself alone in the kitchen one morning when Beatrice walked into the flat without knocking. She looked different. No makeup, no pearls, just a tired woman holding an envelope. Andrea said nothing. Beatrice placed the envelope on the table. Inside was a handwritten letter. Short, careful, strained. I won't apologize for protecting my son, but I will acknowledge that I misjudged you. You didn't save him by accident. You earned his love, and though I may never understand it, I will stop standing in its way. Andrea looked up. Beatrice's voice cracked. He smiles differently now, and I suspect you're the reason. Andrea nodded slowly. I love him. That won't change. Beatrice gave a stiff nod. Then I'll stop trying to change it. Outside, Aiden waited on the balcony. Andrea joined him, envelope in hand, tears in her eyes. She didn't say sorry, Andrea whispered. She never will, Aiden said softly, wrapping his arms around her. But she left something even rarer. What? Room. The Banana Island mansion sparkled under the late morning sun, dressed for an occasion it never expected. Andrea Okonwa Khalifa's official naming ceremony and clinic launch. In the grand courtyard, white tents billowed gently in the breeze. Gold-trimmed chairs were lined up, hibiscus flowers adorned each table, and a soft live band played a mix of classical jazz and highlife. It was a fusion of two worlds, her world and his, meeting not in competition, but in harmony. But what stunned Lagos high society the most wasn't the setting. It was the fact that Andrea, the girl once whispered about as the one who married him to wait for his death, now stood at the center of it all. Alive, triumphant, respected. Andrea wore a flowing white and gold dress, her hair swept up, her sunflower necklace resting gently against her collarbone. By her side, Aiden stood tall in a matching agbada, looking at her like she was the answer to a question he didn't know he'd been asking all his life. The press was there. Old board members were there. And surprisingly, Madame Beatrice was there too, seated quietly in a corner, wearing a simple blue lace dress, her expression unreadable. But she hadn't protested the event. Not once. When it came time for Andrea's speech, the hush that fell over the crowd was complete. She stood on the small stage, microphone in hand, as confident as ever. I was once told I didn't belong, she began, that I was a placeholder, that my background disqualified me from love, respect, and legacy. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But here's what I've learned. Dignity is not inherited, it's chosen. Purpose is not purchased, it's lived. And love? Love isn't reserved for the wealthy. It's built in quiet kitchens, between 4 bags, in moments of pain and laughter. The audience was silent. And today, she added, I no longer carry someone else's name in fear or apology. I carry it in partnership, in strength, and in truth. My name is Andrea Okonwa Khalifa, not because of where I came from, but because of what I've built. And I intend to keep building, with every heartbeat, every patient, every girl who was once told she was too small for the world. Thunderous applause. Even Madame Beatrice clapped, once, briefly, but it was enough. After the ceremony, Andrea walked into the new clinic adjacent to the mansion, the one Aiden had helped her design with love and care. Inside, photos of community projects lined the walls. One section read, "The Andrea Foundation, Healing with Dignity." Andrea walked into her private office and found Aiden waiting with a single sunflower. "Mrs. Okonwa Khalifa," he teased. She smiled and sat on the desk edge. "You proud of me?" "I'm in awe of you," he whispered. They shared a quiet moment. The air between them was light, steady, earned. Aiden reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold bracelet. It had the name Amari engraved. Andrea blinked. "Amari," he nodded. "It means strength and eternal beauty, just like you. And maybe, like our daughter." Her eyes widened. "Our what?" Aiden smiled, placing his hand gently on her belly. "I had a feeling, and your blood test from last week confirmed it." Andrea gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "We're?" He nodded. She wrapped her arms around him, laughing through tears. "Aiden Khalifa, you just gave me another miracle." "No," he whispered into her ear, holding her tightly. "You gave me one." A week later, the social blogs buzzed again. Andrea Okonwa Khalifa, from paid wife to powerhouse, expecting her first child. Madame Beatrice seen smiling beside daughter-in-law at clinic event. New era? Sunflower love. The romance that defied Lagos society. Back in their home, Andrea stood by the nursery window, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding a paintbrush. She had insisted on painting the walls herself, yellow and soft green, like the inside of a promise. Aiden came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You tired?" She shook her head. "No, just full. Of baby. Of joy." He kissed her shoulder. "You were never a mistake, Andrea. You were the revolution my life needed." She smiled. "And you were the truth I didn't know I deserved." They stood in silence for a moment, wrapped in peace, in partnership, in purpose. Then Aiden leaned in and said, "Let's make a list of names." Andrea grinned. "Sunflower if it's a girl." He groaned playfully. "Again with the flowers?" "Always." They laughed, the room echoing with a sound neither of them had known they needed, home. 1 year later, the Banana Island mansion no longer felt like a museum of grief. The silence had been replaced with gentle music, tiny giggles, and the soft thuds of little feet pattering down the polished hallways. At the far end of the rose garden, beneath a white canopy strung with fairy lights, Andrea Okonwa Khalifa cradled a baby girl against her chest. The child, Amari Sunflower Khalifa, had just turned 6 months old. Her curls were thick, her eyes the exact shade of Aiden's. But her smile, that wide, unashamed burst of light, was all Andrea. Aiden approached from the kitchen veranda, still wearing an apron over his linen shirt, flour dusting his cheek. "The cake's a little crooked," he admitted with a sheepish grin, "but it's filled with love and 2 failed attempts." Andrea chuckled. "You say that like that's new." He kissed her temple, then gently lifted Amari from her arms. Their daughter squealed and clapped her hands as her father spun her gently in the air. Madame Beatrice watched from a distance, seated beneath a shaded tree. She wore soft blue lace and flats. No head wrap today, no jewelry heavy enough to declare war. In her arms was a storybook she'd brought from her own collection. One she used to read to Aiden as a boy. She had come a long way. Not once did she try to correct Andrea. Not once did she question why Aiden cooked, or why Andrea painted the nursery herself, or why Amari's middle name was Sunflower. She had learned the most powerful love often blooms in places tradition deems unworthy. That afternoon, as the private family celebration continued, Aiden gathered a few close friends and family members under the garden canopy. He cleared his throat. Today, we're not just celebrating Amari's life, he said, one hand resting on his daughter's tiny back. But we're also celebrating truth. The truth that love isn't dictated by status, wealth, or legacy. He paused and looked at Andrea. I married her thinking I was dying. I stayed with her because I realized I'd never lived until I met her. Andrea smiled, eyes glistening. Aiden turned to the group. And now we want to dedicate something else. A trust fund for single mothers in underserved areas, in Amari's name. There were gasps of surprise and a few tears. He continued, because if a girl like Andrea had access to the right opportunities earlier, imagine how many more lives she could have saved. Andrea stepped beside him. We're calling it the Real Heir Project. Not just for those born into wealth, but for those who inherit strength, kindness, and purpose, and pass it down. Applause broke out. Even Madame Beatrice stood and clapped, softly, but with intention. Later, as she sat with Andrea under the garden arch, Amari sleeping between them, Beatrice cleared her throat. I never said thank you, she began. Andrea looked over, surprised. Beatrice's gaze was on the child. For loving him, for fighting for him, for not letting my pride break what you two had. Andrea didn't speak. I don't know if I can ever be the mother you deserve, Beatrice added. But I'll try to be the grandmother Amari needs. Andrea reached out and gently touched her hand. That's enough. That evening, long after the guests had left and the candles flickered low, Aiden carried a sleeping Amari into the nursery. Andrea stood at the doorway, arms folded, watching the man who had once been too afraid to live now nurturing a child like she was made of magic. He turned and caught her gaze. What are you thinking? He asked. That I've never seen anything more beautiful than this, she whispered. He crossed the room and cupped her face. I have. He kissed her softly, reverently. They stood there for a while, man, woman, baby, wrapped in a kind of peace that doesn't come easily. Later that night, they sat on the rooftop, sipping ginger tea, Amari asleep in her crib. The city lights below blinked like stars. I still remember the day I signed the contract, Andrea said suddenly. The marriage one? She nodded. I thought I was walking into a slow goodbye. I never imagined I was stepping into my life. Aiden took her hand. I'm glad you did. She smiled. I still don't like the fact that you kept your diagnosis from me. I know, he said. But if I hadn't, would we still be here? Andrea looked up at the stars. We were meant to find each other, whether it was through pain, healing, or sunflower bouquets. He laughed. About those bouquets. They're staying forever. I figured. They both laughed, warm and easy. Then Andrea leaned into his shoulder. You know what the best part of this story is? What? I didn't just become someone's wife. I became someone's equal. And that's something no one can buy. Aiden kissed the top of her head. To the woman who was never a placeholder. Only a beginning. They raised their teacups and toasted. To healing, to legacy, and to love chosen without fear. And beneath the quiet Lego sky, the girl who once walked into a mansion to marry a dying man sat beside the love of her life, with a baby in her heart, a clinic in her name, and a future entirely her own. She was no longer just the woman he was paid to marry. She was the real heir.